Good evening, everyone, um, and good morning to our colleagues on the other side of the pond. My name is Dr. Refiloe Lepere, and I am live from South Africa. And I just want to share my screen. Um, okay, it's not allowing me to share. Um, uh, Okay, it's a pity, but I was gonna show.
You can share screen at the bottom. It's like green and green.
Yes, I clicked on that, and everything is grayed out on my side. So it gives me a warning, a blue warning, but then when I click on any
On
of
the right
the
side, does it say okay?
no, doesn't say. It says share, so I'm clicking on a file, but it's not sharing.
Do you want to log out? Do you want to log out and try and log back in?
Okay, let me try that.
You can try it. Oh, you try it? We can entertain a question. Okay, you can try that.
But it's fine. I can just speak. The
Are you
images.
using Google Chrome?
I am using the Zoom app and I am
I'm just wondering if on top of your computer, is it allowing you? Is it blocking you?
no,
It's
I'm in
blocking.
the Zoom app.
So you know what server? Ask her what server she's in.
Okay, let me see. Wait, okay, there we are.
Oh, I think she has. Yeah.
Okay, one more time. There it is. Okay, I'm fine. Thank you so much for the guidance through that. Okay. All right. So I'd like to take a moment to really thank everyone and thank all the speakers who spoke today. I attended some of the other sessions, and yesterday I attended some of the sessions. It's been a really enthralling and exciting conference to honor Mam Sindiwe, Dr. Sindiwe Magona, and it's really exciting for one to be part of this. So I want to thank the organizers of this conference for really honoring Mom, Dr. Sindiwe Magona. I also want to take a moment to really honor Dr. Sindiwe Magona. I think it's really important for one, as an artist, as a writer, and as a young academic, to really think about how her work has impacted my own work. Um, and I'm part of a community of women who are really dedicated that this moment is such an important moment for all of us, because even though she may not know any of us, or but she has carried us, mentored us, supervised us in different ways, and she is that woman who has pried open bolted doors and laid foundations for all of us so that we are able to really step in and thrive in these moments. So thank you so much, Mam Sindiwe, for your brilliance and for your work and consistently putting yourself on the map and doing amazing work. So I also want to thank the Market Theatre Foundation and Windybrow Theatre and the staff at Windybrow for really bringing me into the project like this, and really to really speak back onto the project. So I'm going to speak about the play and the book The Skin We Are In. And The Skin We Are In is a book, it's a children's book that was written by Dr. Sindiwe Magona and Dr. Nina G. Jablowski. And it is a children's book that is really beautiful. As a book, it's a beautiful book to own. It looks beautiful to read. And then the play was adapted in South Africa by children's theatre writer Umphile Mulosi and directed by Musima Marekane. Mama Rehane, and we have a musical direction by Bokang Ramatlapeng and choreography by Oscar Butelis. And my role in this instance was to be a mentor slash dramaturg to the director. And so I'm going to speak through this idea of how then do we imagine of taking the play, a story that is really written in a very particular way. Also, it's a children's book, but it's really written in a particular scientific, heavy biological, anthropological way, and how do we then translate that onto a stage scene and make sure that it is adaptable to all sorts of audiences and children. So as we know, in South Africa, race, like in the rest of the world, is a very big engagement, and it's a big conversation around how do we oscillate between documentary and the theatrical, how do we tell the real story and that one that is staged. And part of that, therefore, requires that the artist really consistently is trying to think through their own personal, how they're experiencing the world, and they're reporting on their own and making social commentary around what is happening in their own lives, but at the same time, a political commentary, at the same time, a social commentary and economic climate. So The Skin We're In is a story that Mam Sindiwe and Nina Jablowski create and they write, and it's really representing the biological, the social, and the identical struggles that young urbanite children live with, and what then their role is in this world around how do they start engaging around what race is. It is exciting because both the book and the play frame race in a way that is about how do we then engage with these types, with different iterations of vocality, performance of race, gesturing of race, and how we imagine ourselves in the world and how you think about and theorize about what it means to exist. So in writing, as I said, the book itself, it's really about how 5 children, Njabulo, Aisha, Tim, Chris, and Roshni, discover why humans are different and they have different skin colors, and how people's thinking about skin colors has changed over the course of history. The book is aimed at children between the age of 12. However, the play itself is aimed at a much older age group. And while the book dives into the science of race and skin and biology and the logics of it, in the play, we delve into and translate this extensive work of science and look at it into a 40-minute piece that engages children and at the same time try to articulate the illustrations and these beautiful illustrations and make them real and live. It is an incredible feat and still a work in progress, because part of the things that happen is that as the script is being put in, so what I talked about when the words become flesh, as the script is becoming flesh, everything seems to be shifting for us. So we are discovering things around about what is the voice of the characters. So when you've written in a book, as Mr. Fermaris was talking about, how in a novel you have this idea that there's a voice of the writer, of the author, that is really big and that directs everyone's ways of thinking and reading. But if you've read also Sindiwe's other work, you realize that her work is also quite performative. You find that her characters are always in these spaces of creating and monologuing themselves. Hence, Mother to Mother is so easy to make it into a monologue. Living and Loving and Staying Awake also is very monologue-y, and you realize that your characters are able to come alive because already they're finding ways of expressing themselves. So the work then, therefore, to translate it into this performance for children's work has been this idea of having to translate the complexity of skin that is represented in the book, but it's also the complexity of what it means to live as these complex children who are Black, colored, Indian, and white. But also, more importantly, to then think about the redemptive power of the story of race. How do we then represent that in a country like South Africa, where race and the struggles of race are still very much relevant, and they're not behind us. So we're not necessarily trying to represent a utopia, a possibility that we could be just wonderful people, but at the same time, how do we then imagine ourselves outside this domineering condition that we're in? The book offers a theoretical positioning, while the play tries to really engage with the contradictory experiences of the characters, the complexity that they're enrolled in with their lives, the repetitiveness of their lives, and then also what is it that makes performance. So one of the other things that happens is that, when you read the book, because it's such a beautiful book, you want to translate that activity that is happening in the book onto the stage. And one of the things that has had to happen is, how do you then translate conflict, right? And what is that conflict? The conflict is the race in the room. So one of the things that happens for us was race in the room. You'll notice that our cast is an all-Black, all-female cast, whilst we are trying to represent different races in the story. And that was one of the first big conflict moments for us. How do we make sure that we are not stereotyping and creating and falling into the pitfalls of what it means to engage with race? So what we had was a lot of, and we've seen this with ourselves, a lot of various hits and misses when we are thinking about race and stereotypes. And one of our key moments in rehearsals was to raise the play into the idea of that races are recognizable, races are we're able to see and understand them. And of course, how do we then make sure that when we are performing and that behavior of that race and that racial group, it is not just a comedic effect, right? This is not just an exaggerated tongue-in-cheek, and we're just forcing as playwrights and as actors and performers. So how do we make sure that we are, in particular, subversive, transformative, but at the same time ascribe and create a performance that audiences can relate to, audiences can critique, and at the same time hold ourselves to account in a more dignified way? We believe that performance should be about having to represent dignity, humor, and the totality of what it means to be human. So in this instance, the procedures and ways that we had to apply the composition of what it means to represent different races, even as our group seems to be one race, was to think about how do we then think about the positionality of an all-female cast, positionality of an all-Black cast in that representation. Harvey Young, in his book Embodying Black Experience, Stillness, Critical Memory, and the Black Body, writes that we are not all the same, especially when we're thinking around Blackness, that the experiences of Blackness are maybe similar, but they're enacted on us. And a lot of times we find that we are assigned these experiences, the inscription of it then comes with meaning. So inscription on skin color, as the children's book also articulates, is a meaning-making experience. So how do we then dictate in a way that allows for the experiences that are in the room, that the Black women that are in the room can also at the same time identify and acknowledge their own intersecting identities? Young writes that not all Black people have the same experience, but rather they have a remarkably similar, and the repetition of their difference and exists among embodiedness of their experience. So when as people and as South Africans, I can also translate what Young writes, is that we don't all have the same experience of what it means to be South African, but we have a remarkable similarity. And therefore, in our understanding and being in the room with each other, we can find ways of having to articulate the experiences of what it means to be South African, what it means to be in different races, and at the same time perform that idea of race. When race is projected on us, we become and return and we become aware of ourselves. When race is performed, then the movements, our dialogue, our words, our communication techniques shift and therefore becomes compositions. So for a staging of this play of the story by Sindiwe Magona, it becomes important for us to challenge ourselves to at least to think about what does it mean to exist in a country like South Africa, where our bodies and our voices and our accents are easily accessible, but at the same time, how do we hold dignity and endeavor to perform both the individual and the collective voice? As a dramaturg / mentor, one of the big things for me that became relevant was this challenge of having accents and voices for the actors. So the actors at first had chosen to really play back their accents as they are, because we all can have access to each other's accents. In South Africa, we are all yebo sisi, ooh wee. It's easy for us to just switch and take it up as we go along. And one of the things that we challenged ourselves was to say, how do we find other ways of voicing the different characters without having to use accents, but also what is a collective accent for the piece? As a mentor, I also felt it was my responsibility to help the actors and the director understand their own collective voice and to think about how they think about the world and how they've encountered the world. As Black women, they've encountered race in different ways, and their everyday stories and lives of having to deal with different racist experiences and having to desire to maybe shift their own skin color and having to identify with the characters in the play and the story. How can those be brought in as ways of thinking around resources and narratives that can also allow and give them much more space to grow and make this play much more relevant? Authenticity then became another big thing, because as we're talking around race and experiences, so not everyone has experienced racism, so there's this assumption, because, we're all Black in the room and we're like, yeah, this. And what was interesting was how the actors, some of them had very different experiences around, because they're young and different lives that they live in and in different encounters. So even when one desired that there was this idea of how do you then experience race in the world, then the story of authenticity came through and becomes a very interesting engagement around authenticity. One of the other questions around authenticity came through when there's a lot of use of hip hop. So the way that Umpila wrote the script is to make it relevant for young people, but to make it and brought in a lot of hip hop and how it's a tool how the actors and the characters engage. So hip hop becomes a way of engaging and talking and really driving character conflict and driving character relationships. But it became also a tool for us because one, it was a question, how African is this, right? It was a question, how truly South African is this? As if hip hop is not an authentic performance of Africanness or an authentic performance of South Africanness. So once the play was on its feet and having to showcase and show different audiences, it was quite interesting to be questioned and thinking through this idea of authenticity and what it means to be an authentic African, but also what it means to be an authentic Black person or authentic Indian person or authentic male. So the other thing is that they are all an all-female character. So what is the role of theater then in this idea of having to represent authentically what we want, right? So that was something to really engage with. And the apprehensions from the actors themselves was it benefited us to have a dialogue and to continually talking with the choreographer, with the musical director, with the director themselves around how do we then address these concepts of authenticity. And I want to share one of the things that happened in rehearsals is this moment where the play itself, as I say, it's hip hop, and then there's a moment where they create a piece that the uncle is Zulu, and he then brings the children together through this Zulu song. And this moment was a moment that was really just, it wasn't rehearsed, but it was happening in the rehearsal room. And the same joy that happens in the rehearsal room is the same joy that happens when you're seeing the play, and this idea of authenticity and speaking back to this. So I wanted to show this. It's a very short clip. It's going to be 50 seconds long. So hopefully you can all hear. And my sound is sharing. Okay. All right. So the authenticity in that moment and the joy and the beauty of that moment is because of the actress was just shown that movement once, and she was able to get it once. That was one, the part of the authenticity. But two, the other part was the authentic joy around it was how even later on when we perform the piece, is how everyone seems to be very drawn to the moment so this whole play is very hip hop It's very English based, and then this one moment of Zulu allows for another revelation to exist. What is also beautiful is that the actress who plays Malume has a way that the kids and everybody is able to feel connected to as a Malume in truth and in reality. So therefore, questions of authenticity become quite interesting for us, because then it suddenly we're asking ourselves, what does it then mean to if we're going to be representing, and what are we desiring when we want, and we're saying we want the authenticity of something. And I think it's a question, I don't have the answer to it, but it's one of the things that we had to engage with it. And then the play, as we are going around the school, so the play is for older children who are perhaps teenagers, and we are now performing it in different places, in different schools. And part of it has been quite the feat for the cast itself, because the cast is doing, not only are they singing, they are dancing, they are acting, and then also then they have to facilitate. So, as a musical theater student, I remember people were triple threats. But with this play, where I'm realizing there could be people who are focal, or I don't know how you say it, focal threats, and they are serious threats in the moment. But it's been an interesting moment, because part of that complexity of having to perform and hold the room. So you're not only holding a very hard topic like race, and we know, and I don't know if anyone in the room who are parents, having to have a conversation with your children around race, this is also very hard for them, but it's also they have to then hold the songs, hold the dances, and hold the conversations afterwards. What we've learned through this process of having to rehearse and do and facilitate and rehearse the facilitation is about talking about race also. That when we teach children, even teaching ourselves to talk about race, it's a very uncomfortable experience. It sits in a place where we all are not aware of how, we're not even knowing where we're going to go with the conversation. We know that we have to understand and respect each other and appreciate the differences between people, but we also know that in that moment of empathy and compassion, we also have to be just. We have to be articulate what is unjust, what is unfair. We have to be clear on the idea of what has happened in the past and what the crisis is in this current landscape around race and what's happening. It is also important that we also imagine a new paradigm. And part of what the play has offered us and the story that Mam Sindiwe has created for us is this idea of there is a possibility of a new paradigm. The way that the story is written starts, and Mam Sindiwe tells a very beautiful story about it, about the chameleon, that the chameleon offered her a portal, a way of thinking about shifts and changes, and what if, as people, we're able to radically shift and change our own race and change ourselves. Of course, we know in the world people are able to do that. We have a Kanyumbao in our lives who's changed their own skin, and a number of other people who are doing transracial experiences. So this kind of conversation is also included in the play, to have this idea of what will it mean if somebody had to change their race and change their skin, and what they would look like internally and outside. But not only are we asked by the play and the moment that we're in this post pandemic moment of where race has been really in our faces, and to think about what does it mean, therefore, as parents, as adults, as friends, as loved ones, as family, to have humility and strength to have a conversation and to have a spirit of learning, because race is always in this moment of flux. We're always learning something new. I'm a critical race scholar, and I've been doing a lot of plays around race. But this experience was very different from me altogether, because also I have been working with adults, and I've been willing to fight adults on a lot of terms and things. But right now with children and with young actors, with people who are vulnerable on their own bodies, you have to really be humble and allow for light and allow for this idea of the seismic and the big things and the big thinking and big being, the paradigm that is out there. So truly and remarkably, I want to acknowledge that there are shadows that we have to deal with as we are engaging in conversations around race and talking about race, but there are also beauty. There's also ways that what Simone Lee talks about, that we move in and we find ourselves in action, that we take opportune time to put ourselves into action. So therefore, I'm really excited that this play is going on. So I'm going to show you another short clip, a 1-minute clip of the play as it's been shown in different schools and different children, and hopefully there, and I'll just share as a closing, the reception and the reflections from the children in the schools that we've had. This is the play. Look at our skin, see all the colors, black, white, and brown, all the others. Though my skin's a source of pride, it doesn't show what's inside. My clever skin knows how to adapt. It's just a package in which I'm wrapped. Oh, it's the first thing that you see. It's not the most important part of me. We all have feelings, thoughts and fears. We learn to grow through the years. We may look different, different hues. But it's a good thing, a bit of news. My skin comes from my genes. Through the ages by my ancestors from different places. Skin protects us from the sun. That's where it'll stop. But it doesn't make a difference to what's in our hearts. Stay food, my man. Listen closely, dear friend. The skin is the beginning and not the end. Go! Yes, Mzala Mzala. So the reception from the different schools that we've been has been amazing. It's been, and as you said, like for us, having to have conversations about race has been hard, but at the same time, we found that one of the responses that the teachers have shared was that it's been a thoughtful and a creative piece, and the girls at their schools were inspired and allowed them to think critically about race and other issues. It was valuable. Another one was I thought the production did what it set out to do. It opened doors to thought and discussion and possibly new ways of thinking about race, and will definitely recommend the play for grade 5 to grade 9s. And then part of the other part was to also ask the actors themselves of how they experienced the piece and how they've been experiencing being part of Kwasha. And they were saying being part of it has really brought new stories to their lives and the idea of telling stories that are new. They've also thought about, one also said that there's open doors, and they're challenged by the tasks that they've had to do while creating and sharing meaningful stories. So I think part of what we have encountered, and as you see the different pictures and the different reactions from the different children, in this one, it's such a lovely, it's that the video doesn't play properly, but in this one, the children helped to strike the set afterwards because that's how much they enjoyed the play. And what it has done is that they're able to have conversations that are hard, but at the same time, really find a safe space to be able to ask new questions, especially around the biology of what it means to be black, white, colored, Indian, and what the difference is between race and ethnicity, especially because sometimes in a country like ours, we really put them all together and make them sing. But I want to really thank our actors, the staff at the Market Theatre, Gerard and Zintle, the directors, and the stage manager, Lucy Malefahlo, and our felicitation trainer, Ms. Bridget Mary Scoots. And thank you everyone for being here and letting me speak. So I'll wait for questions.
I'll ask that question. Philip is asking, is there a Ministry of Culture that is invested in theater? And how much can you depend or draw upon that? So maybe Nigel or Dr. Lepere can answer that.
Sorry, I in fact missed the volume is a little low here. Could you just repeat that, please, Renee?
The question is, how much support do theater companies get from the government, from the Ministry of Arts and Culture, in order to help promote these works?
Yes, well, I can only say that our experience for Beauty's Gift was we did get some funding from the National Arts Council, which is part of the Department of what's now called Sports, Arts and Culture. But by and large, the theatre industry, the arts industry, I don't like calling them industry, but we'll use that word, are very, very poorly served by government generally. There is not much support. quite often you may have heard of ridiculous things where they wanted to do, you know, spend a huge amount of money on a national flag, on a flagpole. You know, these things were eventually shot down, but the point was that they actually thought of them. And yeah, there's been a lot of corruption in terms of the lotto, which is you know, there's a lot of money there for supporting not only charities but also theatre companies. There has been some money that has flowed towards theatre companies, but simply not enough. There really isn't enough support.
Thank you.
Then if I don't know if Refiloe would like to say anything. Refiloe, do you mind if I use your first name?
Fine. Yeah, there is. Yeah, I agree with Nigel. There is some support. There is we apply. There is some support. I think we are supported in different ways. Of course, it's not enough, and there should be more. And there is a lot of stories. There's a lot of work that is here in South Africa, but there is a need for more to be done. And yeah, and I totally agree with Nigel that there needs to be a much more concerted effort towards story making. And I think part of historically South Africa also has been quite conscious. And I think also, you know, our ruling government knows this. They're very conscious about knowing the power and the role and the of the arts. I mean, they historically they had radio, you know, radio programming, the arts, poetry. They have books coming out of Exile and ANC. We have poet laureates coming out of the ANC. So all of these things are very much clear. There's a good understanding of what it means to support and with the arts. It's a different thing whether there's a will, but there's a great understanding what the arts mean and what we do. And yeah.
Well, one thing I might add is that these stories, I think, would really work well on the American stage, and I think that their themes would be very powerful here, and I would imagine other places as well. The one text that's been talked about in this session that has traveled is, of course, Mother to Mother. Marcia, do you want to say anything about the international appeal of Mother to Mother? Have you followed that? Oh, you need to unmute. We still can't. Oh, there you go.
Okay, thank you. I saw it in South Africa, of course, at Grahamstown, but I also saw it in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Festival, where it was part of a South African season. And it was fantastic. And of course, a lot of people, producers, are in Edinburgh to see. I'm sure it's been to New York as well. It hasn't been to Toronto. I wish it would come here. But every now and again, we do have material from South Africa, and wherever possible, if I'm asked to intervene or write letters or show that that particular performance would be worthwhile, of course I do it with pleasure. But it would be very, very worthwhile, to bring it to any international venue.
I know that Dr. Magona has been approached by people who are interested in the Caribbean, over in Asia, of having the performance as well too. I've suggested to her, but I don't believe the play is in print, the script play of it.
Oh, it is.
It is. It is.
It has, because I've taught it to graduate students, and that was the sort of rush to get them to publish it.
Gotcha.
So it is now available.
But I think what would be very helpful, because we put it on here at Georgia State, had a one-woman actress from Atlanta put it on, but we had to do a real scramble to find the images to go up that we had free access to. So one of the suggestions I had is that it should have been printed with a CD of images that could be used, which would make it much more easily done on a stage outside of South Africa. And Nigel or Refiloe, any ideas on the potential for your production outside of South Africa?
Well, again, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we need the money just to get it going. I'd like to, could I ask Refiloe a question?
Of course.
Refiloe, I was interested. I know Umpila Malusi's work a little. I've seen some of his stuff at the National Arts Festival some years back. Was he at all involved once he'd done the adaptation initially? Was he involved in developing it in rehearsal? Because obviously a lot happened in rehearsal, as you explained.
Yes. He did come through into rehearsals. He did, but he was very. So earlier, I was in another session. We were talking about the role of an adapter in the session with Pearl, and the role of the adapter, and how Dr. Nkomo was sharing how Dr. Sindiwe is always open to the possibility of how things can shift and things like that. So what has been interesting was the conversation and the story I heard around how when she saw the piece, and she was like, "Oh, y'all didn't need me to have a hand in creating this. Oh wow, you did it. That's great." But also Umpile was also quite not hands-on as normally he is. He's a very hands-on writer, but he was
Yes.
willing to let it, because part of also the reality of a story like this that is, as I talked about, the race is on the skin, right? It's in our bodies and it's in our experiences, and so
Yeah.
a lot of our own personal stories coming into the room, our own personal stories driving the conflict in the room, driving where the story could go, and then driving and how we then perform it for the children in a way that is relevant to them also, because part of the other thing is some of us are old and we assume certain things about children, but then people have other accesses to children and they are like, oh no, that's not
Yes.
how it works for children. So he was generous enough. So um, in the same beauty and generosity that Mam Sindiwe had given with him when she saw the piece that he had written, was the same generosity that
Oh,
he
that's
kind
a
of
nice comparison. Yes.
allowed the
Yes, I
piece
see.
to with him. Yeah.
You said that Sindiwe's work is already performative in a way because she herself is a playwright, and of course she sometimes acts. So she understands about dialogue, which is one of the things that I enjoyed about working with her. Of course, that often heard, she comes up with wonderful lines as dialogue. So yes, so in the adaptation of her work, already there is something there, somebody who understands how things are actually can be performed. So I thought it was a very good point you made. I enjoyed that. Thank you. In fact, I enjoyed your presentation. I enjoyed your presentation a lot. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you to all of three of you for coming today and giving us this. I think we're a little over on time, so we better move on for we have lunch. And then there's one final thing, which is a storytelling session by Dr. Magona. And so we're looking forward to that. But this has been absolutely wonderful. And thank you all for your generosity of your time. And I'm sure there will be a buzz of talk about this at lunch.